Hello there, dear ones. How are you doing this evening? A great big welcome back to the channel. Thank you so much for visiting last week's episode. I had so much fun sharing the stories of the dragons featured. Today, we will learn about a fearsome creature that walks sometimes on 2 paws and sometimes on 4. Some call it cursed, though others believe it seeks out the ability to change form. We have 3 poems about 3 particular reports of the creature, although there are many hundreds more I could have featured. So gather your story listening gear, grab your cushions, drinks, and snacks, and get ready as we share tales about werewolves among us. The King Who Would Be Wolf. Why is the name of Lycaon recognized far and wide with such horror and shame that it makes all the good men hide? Because the man was so wicked that all times give him blame. As one of the first men in Greece to bear a werewolf's name, Lycaon was a wicked man, his court full of excess. 20 sons, born in his same mold, sought the king to impress by copying his vicious lusts, spreading them far and wide, kidnapping slaves and maidens pure, while justice was denied. In time, the noxious stench of his deeds reached Olympus high. The great King Zeus, watching the world from his throne in the sky, determined he would test if the family's cruelty was real by appearing to Lycaon in full glory. He arrived in Arcadia in his true form and frame. Lycaon smiled, nodded and bowed to the god when he came. But in his heart, Lycaon wished to test the god king's power by tricking him and thus emerging hero of the hour. So vile and awful was the king he did not hesitate to slaughter his youngest, Nyctimus, who had earned his hate. By being kind, he took his limbs to the cook as food fresh, to stew it up. He thought Zeus would not recognize the flesh. When he did not, Lycaon would point out that it was odd. A king of men could confuse and deceive a mighty god. Of course, Lycaon was quite wrong. Zeus took a single bite, and thunder rumbled all around. It became dark as night. Zeus gestured, and poor dead Nyctimus sprang again to life, while Lycaon's other sons fell dead as if by the knife. And Lycaon dropped to his knees, bleeding out strangled cries. As fur sprouted on his legs and arms, fear flashed through his eyes. Great claws pierced through his hands and feet, hurting as they ripped flesh. Cracks sounded as bones broke, and changed and twisted muscles meshed. At last, a wolf as black as night stood where the king had been. For one moment, the eyes of a man gazed upon the bleak scene. Then all humanity was gone. The wolf was cast away, out into the farthest of wilds, where wise men did not stray. And there, he was condemned to live in summer heat and rain, to fight with brute creatures like him, suffering every pain. And, if the story told is true, Lycaon lives there still, a feral beast hungering for his growling guts to fill. So, never forget those who would the innocent abuse. One day, the whole world will look on the true monster in you. The Devil's Boy. The poor boy wandered through the French countryside. Nobody now remembers his real name. His mother was a lady sold for pleasure. His father was a peasant who awayed. Long before he was born, he made a living out in the hills, watching for goats and sheep. When he could not get work, he stole and was whipped, and was cast out upon the streets to sleep. Perhaps it was that very desperation that caused the boy's deluded wits to fray? Or was it that one sunny summer morning, the devil himself truly came his way? That's what the boy told to a court much later, that he'd been walking through a fallow field and saw a great man on a coal-black charger, riding him down. He thought his fate was sealed, but just when the horse's hooves should have struck him, the creature came to a halt in one place, and a voice soft and trickling as honey came from behind the veil that hid his face. According to the boy, the rider told him that he could be a gentleman of power, but only if he slaughtered and killed young folk and made them fear the oncoming dark hour. To do that, the man would give him the power to change his form into a foaming beast. He gave to him a tin of a stinking salve. Rub it on him, and he would wish to feast on blood and flesh. He would sprout thick fur and fangs. A screaming howl from his throat would break free. His eyes would glow like red coals in the darkness. And all at once, a wolf the boy would be. This much is known. What the court could not decide was how a boy as skinny as a rake, whose hands trembled and teeth had cracked from famine, a slew of chewed and dead corpses could make. For girls and boys had been found through the country, with holes bitten in their flesh and their throats, along with tufts of a gray substance, like fur, and rancid smells, as from a wild beast's coat. No more was known, until a girl of 16, guarding her father's sheep, fought far away, a wolf that attacked and bit into her leg, then looked to find the boy there in its place. The constables arrested and brought him in. The boy amazed them by confessing all, how he loved to stalk little girls and eat them, and, if at liberty, would consume all who crossed his path. The judges could have burned him, but oddly, for that time, they showed mercy for what they considered a young boy maddened by violence, neglect, and misery. Yet one day, the boy vanished from his prison, never to be seen in those parts again. The question is, did he move on and grow up, or stalk new fields, hunting women and men? The Ossory Wolves. In Ireland's hills walked a saint named Patricus, who in later years would be called Patrick. He preached the word of Christ and God in heaven, and those who saw him said he had the trick of softening that hardest of flinty hearts and opening the souls of cruel and proud, so that they wept with shame and then with delight. To find redemption was for them allowed. Throughout the green and misty realm, he traveled, always on foot, sometimes with other men, carrying little but a skin of water. Trusting to God, he would find helpful friends. Some said that, despite the ingrained old beliefs, Patrick alone would convert all of air, and that there would not be forest or mountain that did not ring with gently uttered prayer. Alas, though, there was one tribe who disdained him. They cared not what the preacher had to say. They spat at him when he arrived one morning. Patrick smiled and returned the next day. That day, the women hissed and threw stones at him. The men with pitchforks drove him from the place and warned him if he entered their home again, he'd need more protection than some God's grace. Did Patrick give up? Perhaps he thought of it. His faith was great, but his blood and body had the same spark that cries out for survival as that which burns today in you and me. Perhaps he prayed, asking God for direction. Certes, he sent his companions away, telling them to carry the truth with them. Should it emerge, he did not win the day. Finally, on a dark and misty evening, when the clan danced and whooped around their fires, St. Patrick returned and began to tell them about the Christ and the love he inspired. The men were enraged and agreed one and all that they would do the saintly man to death. Indeed, they'd make him suffer such agony that hearing it would make men lose their breath. Patrick had preached and turned his back on the place to return to his camp out in the hills when he heard many hard footfalls, thundering, and voices crying they would do him ill. Patrick did not run. There was no point in it. He'd walked for months, was weary and footsore. If no one intervened, the men would kill him and continue their old lives as before. Instead, Patrick prayed. He gave thanks for his life, for all who'd listened as he'd passed their way. Then he asked God if he willed it to protect him. If not, he prayed his terror would away, so that in death he could be an example of that love that in Jesus Christ he'd found. He asked that God receive his soul in heaven, even if his corpse found no holy ground. The men, like phantoms, were passing around him when Patrick chose the place to make his stand. He prayed out loud, even in his last moments. He hoped one weary soul might understand and find their peace. For that much and nothing more, he'd have been glad to give his life away. He tried not to imagine all the horrors the Celts might do before he passed away. But when his pursuers resolved from the mist, he saw not men, but running wolves of gray, who shied from him as if from an armed bowman. They streamed by on each side, then ran away into the woods, yowling in fear and distress, the sounds almost like the voices of men. Patrick stood, open-mouthed, but then he gave thanks when he knew what his God had done to them. It said the men of the village remained wolves. For 7 full years after that dark night, they hunted with wolves, slept in cold and darkness, but had the minds of men to yearn for light. 7 years later, some say prayer said for them, convinced God above to set the men free. And never after did they menace strangers or mock the power of Christianity. Subscribe to become a delicious darling. So, there we have it. Do you think that werewolves really walk the shadows? What would you do if you encountered a werewolf? Let me know in the comments. Today's word or words for the brave people who made it to the end of the episode is Loop Guru. Type it in the comments. Then let me know your life's scariest experience. As always, this is the time when I ask you to click subscribe or follow and hit the notification bell to become an official delicious darling. I was supposed to be going for a run tonight, but there is a fierce storm outside. A panth keeps demanding cuddles, so for just this once, I will stay inside and read up on strange and magical creatures for us to talk about next week. Thank you for spending your time with a panth and I tonight. It is wonderful to have such good friends. Take care of yourselves and the people you love, and sleep well, my delicious darlings.